It goes without saying, but I really love video games. Regardless of the circumstances of my life that I'm going through or what I'm trying to achieve in the future, it is nice to have something to turn to when I want to turn my brain off or become a bit introspective. I find this to be particularly potent within the online space. YouTube is a platform where, really, if you search in the name of a particular game you like, or are interested in, and then the word essay, you'll find thousands of channels with their own unique outlook on a game that you're interested in. Maybe you have already played, or perhaps you want to learn more about something that you're not that clued up on. I find that beautiful, honestly. In an age of the internet where it's so incredibly easy to feed into the negatives and watch as things become more and more unfriendly to the average person, to the average user, especially in the online space, it is nice that the thing that we can still turn to for comfort at the end of the day tends to be the introspective thoughts of others. Other people always being a bit of a curiosity to us, like we're all sitting down at a campfire and hearing other people talk. Digital fireside chats, if you will. Honestly, that's why I like making such content too, why I love the idea of a video essay. I might be speaking into the void and letting my heart sing a little, or perhaps what I'm saying may reach someone out there, and they can understand how I feel about a particular topic. It means a lot to me. Which is why I have done that previously for Deltarune, a game that has become pivotal and intrinsic to the core of my life. On May 12th, 2024, I uploaded a video onto my YouTube channel named Deltarune and the Beauty of Imagination. The video itself was really a big passion project. For years, as myself and millions waited for more on tobyfox and company's latest project and craved more of that uniqueness, the feelings I had for the game and how I felt stewed and developed over time, and really I wanted to make a video that encompassed how I felt during those particular years, when we really only had a single demo of the game to go off of, always watching the horizon to see when we'd get more. And eventually, we did get more, culminating in the release of Deltarune Chapter 2 on September 17th, 2021. The sun had set on an era of the game's life, an era of the fandom, a moment in history, and a new era began as a result. I've got a lot of thoughts about that particular chapter and the era that it's beholden to, but I want to save that for another video in the future. So why am I mentioning any of this? The sun is setting on the Chapter 2 era of Deltarune, of the culture and the fandom surrounding it, as Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 release on June 5th, 2025, nearly 4 years after the last chapter. As someone who's been so fixated on this game for years, I felt overwhelmed with joy seeing not only more of what's to come, but knowing when it's coming. And it makes me feel a lot of things. There is a lot that I want to discuss in a video like this. Join me in a bit of a more introspective upload as I talk about Deltarune again, how I feel about all of this, reminiscing, how I feel as time passes and things will begin to change for the game, the fandom and the culture surrounding it. Join me in discussing my thoughts as someone who's been here all the way back in 2018 about how it feels to see the game and all around it change over time, yet soon to be in an instant. The passage of time is a funny thing to me. On one hand, it's always something surprising to hear when someone points out how much time has passed in a given moment. This is especially the case since the start of the 2020s, wherein most people were stuck indoors due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the ensuing isolation and hyper-online atmosphere of it all. On the other hand, there's a kind of crippling dread to it, a feeling of wondering where all the time has gone, and if we used any of that time right from back then. For me, I feel a mixture of both. I remember days back in the COVID-19 pandemic, how each day felt so individually long, how strange it felt to be in the comfort of the online space in my own home, but there was never really a way to disconnect from it all, have a break from any of it, because the alternative was switching off and seeing the increasing coverage of death and despair from the rising COVID statistics. It was a weird time to be alive. The point is, however, is that most people comment on the passage of time back then, with many looking back and wondering where any of that time went, some feeling like they were robbed of time to grow up, or time to really go out there in the big wide world. Time passed strangely during this era. The same can be somewhat said for gaming back then. During the early years of the pandemic, games such as Among Us and Friday Night Funkin' dominated the internet, both having wide acclaim and love from their audiences, with the creativity of the Funkin' fanbase in particular constantly upping itself week by week, as people had time to shine with their artistic skills, get feedback, engage with one another in communities. And for a game like Among Us, to connect people together, even if that usually resulted in a funny little avatar being ejected into space or streamers hollering at each other for comedic effect. Both were incredibly popular for their own individual reasons, but they really highlight a certain culture, in a sense, one of indulgence, as there wasn't much other choice in having stuff to do back then. There wasn't really anything else you could do back then at a point in time where going outside usually meant risking your life. Perhaps that's an exaggeration, but for many of us, that was true. Since the pandemic, Friday Night Funkin' and Among Us have continued to persist, although as new trends and memes, new games hit the digital space, it can be argued that their presence has lessened since the dreary days of COVID. Or are we the ones who've changed, moved on from those things, while those games have not? It's honestly kind of hard to tell. Deltarune is curiously a game that I feel that has avoided this kind of particular fate. Back when the game released on October 31st, 2018, I remember that the fandom had a bit of a slow start. As the game released to sudden surprise, a lot of people were still processing its release. People were taken off guard, although not in a negative sense. Early fanarts had adorably the growing pains of people not being inherently familiar with the designs of the characters, resulting in a lot of early quirks that you can see when you go back to look at this era, such as debates over Susie's species, or cloaked ralsei being considered a spider or some sort of soot sprite monster, or Kris is Chara from Undertale theories being prevalent. However, as time passed on and 2019 came and went, the fandom began to develop further, with early AU content, alternate universe, such as Paper Trail being the most prevalent examples of fan work that gained visible traction, as there were very few in-game indications of what future chapters would be like, ideas for future Dark Worlds or story beats remained vague, and characters that would ultimately be shown later in further installments, such as Chapter 2, such as Queen, would be matched more closely to anything analogous within the current game, what we currently had. Beating Jevil back then was at one point considered a feat on par or above beating Sans in Undertale's genocide route. That one personally makes me giggle a little bit. Without much other content, most people in the online space turned to either theorizing, making fan art, or heading into the shipping scene, with Kris and Ralsei and Kris and Susie being incredibly popular, alongside later a growing popularity of Susie and Noelle. However, because of the lack of content beyond this and the vagueness surrounding Deltarune itself as a project, undoubtedly helped by the ominous and surprise release it had, people stuck with familiar territory. By this, people used the crumbs of content they had from the game, utilising different communities such as those on Discord, Twitter, 4chan and Reddit to dissect and enjoy and discuss the game to the deepest degrees, with many a fan work or community headcanon keeping the flame of interest alive for a lot of people. Although the beginning of a content drought had started to form towards the end of 2019, as from memory, discussion of Deltarune on a wider scale just started becoming less common. During the beginning of what can now be considered the first great content drought for the game, both in terms of news about the game and fan reaction as such, the COVID-19 pandemic began, forcing practically everyone indoors or working from home. ensuingly making fan spaces overall more active, not just Deltarune in this case. The Deltarune fanbase became somewhat more active, although by the end of 2020 and heading into mid-2021, activity had primarily slowed to a crawl, with even spaces like that of the 4chan threads that existed and discussion there slowing. I vividly remember that most Discord servers I was in around the time had less and less activity as the months went on, and seeing fan art of the Deltarune characters generally became more and more rare to come across just out in the wild, as other fan bases became more popular due to newer game releases during this time period. The content drought, however, would come to an end when Deltarune Chapter 2 would be announced and subsequently released during mid-September of 2021. While the pandemic had primarily caused fan spaces to be more active overall, this had the unintentional effect of slow decay on the long wait for anything Deltarune related. Keep in mind that people had been waiting for about approximately 3 or so years already, so imagine what it must feel like to keep waiting while you're feeling so restless from a pandemic that's way out of your hands. However, with the release of Chapter 2, the inverse happened, causing a massive spike in popularity for the game overall, as the hype kept the game consistently relevant in the public eye for far longer than the original demo had. Fan art, the shipping scene, fan creativity overall, and especially the theorizing, rose up in popularity during this time, and for the next few years the Deltarune fanbase would keep waiting for more, as events such as the Spamton sweepstakes, the often newsletters directly from Toby and company about the game's development and progress on future chapters, and fan works such as the various surges in AU content like that of the other puppet, the Salt Route, and various swap AUs would keep the game alive. A new layer had been added onto the game, one that people even now are still digging into, even considering the fact that chapters 3 and 4 are not that far away. There's a lot to do with this particular era of the game's life, a lot that I really wish to discuss in a follow-up to that of my Deltarune and the Beauty of Imagination video, so I'll keep my thoughts tempered for that video's eventual sequel. But overall, the point is that the inverse to the way that some games and media had a decline in activity or relevancy onward from the COVID days, Deltarune just didn't stop being consistently relevant when it came to having an online presence, with the fanbase and those who kept up with the game keeping the torch alive and lit. From being released during the COVID era, the unique circumstances of what COVID was allowed for Deltarune Chapter 2 to be repeatedly processed and made new to anyone who discovered it, with those who had been unfamiliar with the game beforehand jumping on board for the new release. However, I feel that the ecosystem that COVID created with how hyper-online things became allowed for Deltarune Chapter 2 to succeed in a way that the original demo just couldn't match. Although, let's be real, both Deltarune Survey Program Demo, Chapter 1, and Chapter 2 would succeed even if COVID was not a thing. Let's be real here. Seeing all this from, well, my own personal perspective go down was, quite frankly, surreal. As someone who had been relighting the torch of interest each Halloween for years since 2018, seeing the first content drought affect the game's overall fanbase and perception across different sectors of the internet, as people really made a lot out of the crumbs we had back then. Someone who had been there since practically the start, seeing the game get a second wind in popularity and more people appreciating it for its qualities genuinely means a lot to me. It felt nice to see something that means a lot to me, something that has so many genuinely beautiful qualities to it, get appreciation to an even greater extent than it had been getting before. People after Chapter 2 began to look at the game in a lot of ways that even I had been unable to for all these years, creating so much beautiful fan work out of it that to this day I still love. It really means a lot to see something like this inspire so much genuine, beautiful creativity, especially as an artist myself, in which Deltarune became a bit of a litmus test to see how much I've developed as an artist myself. I've been growing up alongside this game for the longest of times, and it means a lot to me to see people appreciate the game en masse in such a similar way. Even as we have been years past the release of Chapter 2, as the fanbase has become somewhat brain-rotted, if Friend Inside Me and Deltarune Tomorrow is an indication of, the fact that we've gotten to this point of juvenility and getting this silly when it comes to something that really all of us love is a testament to the fact that we all simultaneously love this game very dearly. It clearly means a lot to us. Not even COVID could affect or kill the creativity that this fanbase has to offer, that this game has to offer, and that says a goddamn lot. Which is why, when it comes to the impending release of chapters 3 and 4, I feel a lot of things. I don't think I've ever been more excited to see Toby's avatar than I did in this single moment. For those of you who've already seen my Chapter 1 era retrospective, you may already know a little about my history when it comes to chapter reveals for this game, but for those who do not know, I saw the reveal of Chapter 2 live. Back when that chapter was revealed live, I was in a voice call with good friends of mine, hyperventilating at what must have been the early hours of the UK morning, practically going crazy, and crying out of happiness over the fact that years of waiting had been all the more worth it. The dream was real. Something comforting was coming to me very soon. Something dear to me had a place in my life even more, once again with its surprise reveal to the world in that very live stream. Deltarune Chapter 2 wasn't just a dream, it was a tangible fucking concept. Which is funny how history repeats itself, huh? To be honest, I had a bit of a habit around this time recently where I would just open up OBS just in case, because I wanted to record my reaction. Days prior, there had been a Nintendo Direct concerning the Nintendo Switch, which I watched with friends anyway. Nothing got shown off in terms of Deltarune. And to be honest, I couldn't really see it in my mind that something like, say, I don't know, Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 will be a fucking launch title for the damn Switch 2! But, you know, I'm glad I was wrong. So we're all in a call on Discord, me and my friends, watching the Switch 2 Direct. We're seeing all the new details, there's one person going crazy over the Donkey Kong game. I go ballistic later at the fact that there's a Yakuza director's cut. Like, great shit. I love it. Beautiful. Peak. And then I see Toby's avatar, and the entire call goes from, you know, relatively normal, human voices, into a frenzy. If you misheard us, you'd think a horde of rabid monkeys just found a banana in their enclosure. But, my god, to live through that feeling of seeing this get announced live for a second time, to know this feeling for a second time, to know that this summer, something this dear to me is returning in double the dosage, means fucking everything to me, man. To see all these characters that I've spent years thinking about, caring about, being invested in, a plot I want to see more of, all this raw display of art and imagination in front of me, it means everything. It means everything to be able to experience something like this, to have something like this to look forward to. But truthfully, it makes me feel a whole lot more than that. I don't mean to sound like a boomer, like an old person when I say this, but a part of me is equally as terrified as I am excited, although the fear I have doesn't necessarily come out of a place of negativity or, you know, being a Debbie Downer. More contemplation. This is the second time I have been here to see a divergence, a shift within the fandom of this game. A shift within how the game will be perceived online, how people will act in accordance to it, how people will be when being creative about it. As I speak in this video, the sun is quite literally setting on the Chapter 2 era of Deltarune's digital life, from 2021 to June of 2025. That's 4 years beginning from the COVID age to the weird post-COVID landscape we exist in now, where people's lives have literally been put through the ringer, and a lot of people aren't the same as they used to be before getting put through the meat grinder that is living sometimes. People have quite literally grown up as this chapter of the game has been popular. Some people have completely changed. A lot of things have happened. I can attest to that, personally. Being here at the turn of a new divergent shift, seeing all of this culture come to an end as people will react accordingly to chapters 3 and 4 in a way that will really be new and unprecedented for the game and its fanbase, is a really weird feeling. I am somewhat terrified of that change. Not because I fear that people will twist the game into something it isn't. No, absolutely not. I think people will only become more outspoken and thoughtful when it comes to the game, because there's a lot more to process and dissect and appreciate. I like this. But because I, myself, am afraid of sudden changes. Even as Deltarune Chapter 2 was announced nearly 4 years ago now, I felt a rush of excitement and slight fear about the sudden state of change upon me, wondering if the bonds I had created with friends during the first content drought and those early days would survive or collapse under their own weight. Fortunately, a lot of them ended up keeping strong, which I'm thankful for. History is repeating itself. Change is incoming. I am somewhat scared of that. But I know that in the end, what Chapter 3 and 4 will be nothing short of spectacular. Seeing something I've dreamed of that long ago, this intangible concept, something that felt like an impossibility, a point that we'd eventually get to, be corporeal, tangible, like an actual thing, is surreal. But as that feeling gets stronger, as the chapters release, the creeping feeling of having to acknowledge that at some point, after a point, this game and its fanbase will eventually no longer get more to it in terms of the story is also scary in a way. What comes after Deltarune? Will there be an after? But that's something that will come to pass, and something that we'll process more in due enough time. Everything has its time, and everything ends. It's something that we all must accept at one point. But it doesn't mean it's the end. It doesn't mean it's gone. But hey, we've got a long way to the end. Let's focus on what we have here in the present. Or soon what we're going to get anyway. As Deltarune has evolved from 2018 to 2025 now, so have I. Seeing it change through all of this time, as I changed too, it being one of the most crucial constants in my life hits deeply home to me. But the game itself has always been like that. My relationship with the game is personal. Allow me to ramble somewhat. Deltarune has been with me in crucial parts of my life. I'd go as far as to say that really it saved me a lot. When I first played Chapter 1, through the original survey program release, I was a stressed college student, 17 years old, trying to have a good Halloween, as circumstances made the day utter hell. I've mentioned this within Deltarune and the Beauty of Imagination. I was having a bad Halloween when survey program came out, and really it rectified that. I didn't complete my first playthrough in a single sitting. Rather, I played on the day, and then a few days later I was able to catch up and finish what I started. But the experience stuck with me, and in February of 2019, as the end of my second year of college loomed over me and the winter blues hit me harder than they ever had before, as life got more complicated and it felt like I wasn't able to handle much of the stresses in my life as a result, I returned to the game for a second time, cup of tea in hand, and I fell in love with the game even more. As my time in college ended and the emotions of the experience stuck with me, I decided that I needed a break. Education had consistently been stress-inducing for me, and my teenage years in it had not been the best, with many of those years being strained by school being frustrating, losing friends, a lot of personal stuff going on in my life, being homeless at one point, exams that made me feel like my life would end if I didn't succeed at all. It crippled me in a way. It really made me way more anxious than I needed to be. College had been another mountain of stress on top of everything already, with my college being particularly frustrating to deal with and the baggage of my personal life making it all the more straining. As a result, once I graduated from college, I decided to take a single year out of education before applying to university. I needed a genuine break. But in that time, I became reckless, and eventually it bit me in the arse. Wanting to improve with my art, I had the idea of offering cheap commissions, trying to see if I could save myself from the struggle of having no funding in any sense of the word. And fortunately, thanks to the kindness of close friends and strangers and even a few people from the Deltarune fanbase themselves, I'd survive for the next year off of cheap commissions, keeping me afloat, shaping and forging me as an artist as it helped me improve, trial by fire. My days would consist of doing the commissions I'd acquired, keeping in touch with my clients, with friends, as I began to accumulate more friends and more connections through Deltarune as a fanbase, keeping close connections as aimless days became filled with the bustle of those comfy contacts and the art that I was getting better at, as commissions and the bonds I forged and made with those friends essentially saved me from despairing all the damn time. The darkness of night became a time for me to be at peace as I could rest for the day, save my hands from completely balking out of fatigue, using the little money I had on cheap cola and crisps to reward myself for surviving. There was this one particularly good deal that used to be at the local shop that I was at where I could get like 2 cans for £1. Anyway, I'm going off topic. What I'm trying to say is they were hard days, but in all of it, my connection to the game and the relationships that blossomed between myself and others, especially in the Deltarune fanbase, grew. October came around, and I decided, with the little funds I had, to get some cola, some crisps, and return back to Deltarune. I mused to myself at the time, jokingly wondering if I should make this a yearly thing, to come back to the game that gave me the most escape, the most comfort, away from how bad the real world could be. All my teenage life, escape never felt like much of an option. Even as a kid, it didn't really feel like an option. But as I grew older and going out to trick or treat no longer became a viable option, why not replace it with time for myself? With the game that embraced me as much as I embraced it. So I did. Time passed and the pandemic began. My already isolatory life became strained by the fear of a virus that had a death toll that rose by each passing day. The relationship I had with someone from my college ended miserably for a variety of reasons, and the days increasingly became longer and longer and longer. Games like Friday Night Funkin' and Among Us, web animation like Enna, rose up during this time, all being massively popular as myself and the online space became the norm, as going outside no longer felt like an option. It no longer was an option. Commissions kept going, and eventually I got into the university that I wanted to be in. The year between college and going into uni had passed by, and I had survived it. I kept doing commissions. I grew as an artist as I held onto the hope of more Deltarune, engaging with everything I could to keep that passion alive, with it becoming something crucial to my life, my greatest hyperfixation, as it was the one thing that I knew media-wise that gave me the most comfort, allowed me to just shut off my brain. Halloween became a day each year since 2018 that I would replay this game, reigniting the flame of passion each time and keeping it alive, giving me comfort as my life has only continued to get more complicated, always holding on to the hope of more Deltarune. It meant everything to me. It means everything to me. Even more so as my university experience, turns out, was hampered by mismanagement and COVID restrictions, and eventually that patience was rewarded with the tease and release of Deltarune Chapter 2, which only helped me love the game more, and it closed the door on a long era of not only the game's life, but my life, leading to me making this video and where we are today. As the release of Deltarune Chapters 3 and 4 loom over us, time has passed. People have arrived in our lives, left our lives. Some people have been born, some have unfortunately died. Circumstances continue to change. COVID becomes a part of our everyday life as a waking fact, rather than a morbid reality, just as common as a cold, contrasting the death and despair that we felt back in those early years. During the time between Chapter 2 and what is to come, I've graduated from my BA in photography, spending 3 years in a subject that slowly became really depressingly frustrating, again due to mismanagement, to taking a singular year master's degree and finding myself loving the subject again. And I'll find myself going through life on my own terms, hoping to live on my own terms. A far cry from the teenager, the scared person that I used to be. As of this video, I am 24 years old. 25 in December. I was 17 when Deltarune came into my life. It's nearly been 10 years. And truthfully, despite all of those frustrations I've felt, the upsets I've had, the changing circumstances, all of the curveballs that I have consistently been thrown throughout the years, I'm glad I'm still here. I have a lot of things that I can thank for that, but the kindness of others in this fandom, Deltarune, the friends that I found here, the people I loved there, the game itself that kept me happy during the darkest days of my life, I believe I can thank them for that. Perhaps with this previous video that I made, Deltarune and the Beauty of Imagination, and this one that you're watching now, this comes across as an incredibly autistic hyperfixation. And you know what? Maybe it fucking is. Maybe it is. But it means everything to me. And I am both excited, terrified, and hopeful for the future with chapters 3 and 4. The sun is setting on a period of the game. Its fanbase, my life, and there's a vast unknown ahead that none of us are going to be able to predict fully until we see it, but I'm more than willing to see it through. There's a lot of things here that I haven't mentioned, for good reason, as I have already made a bit of a chapter 1 retrospective with my previous video. I intend to do a lot more in-depth videos in the future when it comes to, say, chapter 2 and the era it's beholden to, as there is a lot that transpired during these past crazy 4 years. And really, once the sun eventually sets on chapter 3 and 4, I'll most certainly be doing a retrospective of sorts on that era too. I want to make videos like this, and the previous, and what I want to do in the future, as essentially digital time capsules in a way, preserving things in time, as well as, obviously being in the video essay format. I've said it in quite a few videos of mine in the past, and I really emphasized it in Deltarune and the Beauty of Imagination, but I'm of the belief that no matter how minuscule or niche or irrelevant something may be, it holds value to someone out there, and history, no matter how big or small, this or that, deserves to be documented, as does how this game makes people feel. To me, this means everything. A game that quite literally has helped me be comforted in the worst of times. A game that's brought me friends and people I will keep knowing for the rest of my life. A game that's exposed me to just so much beautiful human creativity that could never be replaced, even if someone tried. Just fucking hell, man. A ton. And it will always be everything to me. I look forward to the future, to savour what came before, to enjoy the now, and to look to the future, as the tides of Deltarune in all manner of ways are beginning to point towards a new, fresh era for the game. See you all there.